Who has the advantage at each position unit when the Gamecocks and Rich Rodriguez's Jacksonville State team do battle on Saturday afternoon? Guys, we start at the most important position on the football field. That is the quarterback position. And JSU, to say they've got an experienced player, is putting it likely. Their quarterback, guys, is that of Zion Webb. He is a seventh-year player out of Phoenix City, Alabama, the redshirt senior, 6'2", 200 pounds. And he's a dual threat guy. I would not say he's an elite thrower of the football by any means, but does enough for that offense to have success. I mean, he has just two touchdown passes. I believe actually 3. I don't think these stats are updated on the JSU website. Either way, not an elite thrower of the football. They've actually played multiple quarterbacks as well. It's been a 2-quarterback system at Jacksonville State. Logan Smothers is the other, the junior out of Muscle Shoals, Alabama, 6'2", 200 as well. I think he's the better of the two when it comes to throwing the football. 5 touchdown passes to his credit. Zion Webb, though, in his last game against FIU, ran for over 100 yards, a couple of touchdowns, if you will. He's really, really good with his legs. So the Gamecocks will have to account for that dual threat type of quarterback attack with Zion Webb, and I would expect them to see Logan Smothers as well, sort of a change of pace guy for JSU. Meanwhile, on the South Carolina side of things, of course, there is Spencer Rattler, the Gamecock signal caller, who, as bad as he's been on the road, right, inconsistent, not nearly as good at home, I do expect the results to be much, much improved because, again, you look at the home and road splits for Spencer Rattler. He's been a different player for whatever reason at Williams-Brice Stadium. Just been a completely different player for the Gamecocks at home. And I think he'll get back to that form, guys. Obviously, he's dealing with a offensive line that's held together by Scotch tape. He's dealing with injuries at wide receiver. He's dealing with an inconsistent run game to support him. And all of that, and I still think you look at him, based off what he has to work with, I still think he's one of the better signal callers, one of the best, I should say, in the SEC. So, Jacksonville State with a wealth of experience. They're going to throw a couple of different guys at South Carolina, but I do think the Gamecocks have the advantage at the quarterback position. At the running backs, I give the nod to Jacksonville State. You look at their running game as a team. This is their bread and butter, averaging 211 yards per game on the ground. Their leader is a man named Malik Jackson, 5'10", 185 out of Lufkin, Texas. The redshirt senior leads this team, 577 rushing yards, 5.5 yards per carry, and 4 touchdowns to his credit, 82.43 yards per game. Guys, I mentioned, by the way, the legs of Zion Webb. Get this. He is their second leading rusher, 335 total yards, 5.4 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns to his credit. He averages 48 yards per game. Logan Smothers, another one. Anwar Lewis is their number 2 option, though, at running back, 5'8", 190. So they're a little bit smaller at the running back position. The redshirt junior out of Pensacola, but he's been really, really good for them. Has a touchdown as well, 199 yards, 4.6 yards per carry. This is as close as it's been in quite some time in regards to comparing the running back position between South Carolina and an opponent, right? Because, for the Gamecocks dealing with what you're dealing with, you have Mario Anderson and then really no second option that you can depend on week in and week out. It hasn't been much of a conversation when you talk about comparing ball carriers between South Carolina and the opponent. Even though the numbers don't reflect it, I do love what Mario Anderson, what he's given this football team. The tough, hard-nosed running, having practically no offensive line to block for him. I think he's done a great job, all things considered. Unfortunately, South Carolina does not have a second punch. Juju McDowell hasn't done much. Dontavius Braswell hasn't been playing. And DeCarrion Joyner isn't really a running back and has just over 100 yards rushing to his credit this season. So you really do not have that second punch. You don't have that second option at the running back position. For that reason, I do give Jacksonville State the nod. I like their top-end talent a little bit more and I like their depth significantly more. We move to the outside, guys, the wide receiver position. I do give the nod here to the Gamecocks. I give the nod to South Carolina. You look at Jacksonville State. Because they don't throw the ball that much, there really are no gaudy numbers from this group. Perry Carter is their leading receiver, 337 receiving yards, 16.85 yards per catch, and 2 touchdowns. To Perry Carter's credit, their second leading receiver is Quentin Lane, who has just 182 yards receiving and 1 touchdown. So they got a couple of guys. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. They've got 6 guys over 100 yards, 1 guy over 300. So, the depth is there. They've got some quality options, but I don't think it compares to South Carolina's. I think Xavier Legette, while he was not himself last weekend, I think he will be back full strength, full go. I like what you have still in Omega Blake. DeCarrion Joyner, he can also play wide receiver. Nicholas Harbor, obviously stepping up and becoming more and more and more involved in the offense. So I like South Carolina's top-end talent more here, and I even think depth. I think the Gamecocks have got Jacksonville State, and I give them the nod at the wide receiver position. At the tight end spot, again, Jacksonville State really doesn't use their tight end position all that much. You look at the numbers, their leading tight end, let's see. Their leading tight end, trying to find him here. I just had his name pulled up here. Sean Brown. Leading tight end is Sean Brown. 6'5", 250, the redshirt junior out of Rome, Georgia. Just 13 catches, 171, and 2 touchdowns to his credit. So they've used him a little bit. Again, guys, this is not a strong passing attack. This is not a lethal passing offense. They do most of their damage in the rushing game. On the South Carolina side, you saw Trey Knox last weekend get a touchdown. We've seen more and more and more of Trey Knox, and he's become one of the top targets for South Carolina. I love the depth the Gamecocks have. I think they found a nice 1-2 punch with Knox and Simon, and for that reason, I do give South Carolina the nod when it comes to the battle at the tight end position. To the offensive line we go. And when you're talking about these different units and Jacksonville State stats or this versus South Carolina's, you do have to factor in the competition they face, right, on a week in, week out basis. You have to factor it. And so, you look at these numbers. Jacksonville State has done a much, much better job of protecting their quarterback. Only 12 sacks surrendered. And the running game is really good, as we mentioned, 211.1 yards per game. South Carolina surrendering 4 sacks against Texas A&M to bring their season total, I believe, to 35, I think is the number. 35 total sacks on this season. And the Gamecocks are one of the worst in the SEC at rushing offense. I know that the competition is different. I totally understand that. But as I've told you all before, and I'll say it yet again, I cannot, with any sort of confidence, pick the Gamecocks' offensive line over anyone else's. I simply cannot do it. I give Jacksonville State their starting 5 up front the nod. You look at coming into the season, guys, they had 4 of their starting 5 offensive linemen returning. It's a veteran group. It's an experienced group in South Carolina with what they're dealing with the injuries and the issues up front. I got to give JSU the nod here. I would take their offensive line right now, unfortunately, over what South Carolina has to work with. Now, on that theme of comparing statistics, different levels, what have you, as we move to the other side of the football, the defensive line specifically, you look at Jacksonville State's numbers, guys. They've done a really good job of getting after the quarterback. 26 total sacks on this season. And they are led off the edge by 2 really, really good football players. And Chris Hardy and J-Rock Swain, both of those guys man the edges for JSU. Anthony Nesby, Jackson Latrette, they are on the interior defensive line. per game. They've allowed 9 rushing touchdowns. And again, they get after the quarterback. You look at South Carolina, 16 sacks as a defense. And for all the things that have gone wrong for South Carolina, they've actually done a pretty decent job against the run. 140 yards per game allowed for the Gamecocks defense. I'm going to go with a push here between these two defensive lines because I do think you have to factor in the competition that each team is playing. I think you have to factor in who they're going up against on a weekly basis. And I do think South Carolina's front seven, specifically their front four, while there's so much left to be desired against SEC competition, when you look at this Conference USA Jacksonville State defensive front and South Carolina's SEC defensive front, I say they're even. I think they're even right now. You look at the numbers, you do all the math, that spits out. I think this is a push between the South Carolina and the JSU defensive lines. Now, to the linebacker position we go, and the leader at the linebacker spot for Jacksonville State is none other than an Auburn transfer, Colby Fucow. I don't think I'm going to say his name correctly, but Colby Fucow is the name. And he's been really, really good for them, by the way. 51 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. From there, there's a bit of a drop-off. JSU does not have a ton of depth. You look at South Carolina. Debo Williams has been flying around. He's certainly not perfect, but has been flying around all season. I think Stone Blanton's coming into his own. I think we're going to start seeing more Grayson Pup Howard. And last weekend against Texas A&M, you finally saw some of Jerron Willis and Bam Martin Scott. I think South Carolina's linebacking core is getting better as the season progresses. I think the linebacking core is improving as the season progresses. With that being said, I do give the South Carolina Gamecocks the nod at the linebacker position. I think, again, what Carolina has, then JSU, Fucow's a nice player, for sure, the Auburn transfer, but not much beyond him. There's not a whole lot beyond him. Believe it or not, I do think South Carolina has more. I give them the nod at linebacker. We move to the secondary and defensive back. And Jacksonville State is actually susceptible through the air. 233 yards per game allowed. So there should be opportunities for Spencer Rattler and this passing attack to hit some big plays downfield all afternoon long. Should be plenty of opportunities. Meanwhile, I don't have to tell you guys much about the Gamecocks secondary, allowing 298 yards per game through the air. Again, you take into account the competition, you take into account what Jacksonville State has coming into the season. They return Jamari Jamison, Jeremiah Harris, both in their secondary, both leaders in the secondary for JSU. I'm going a push for the defensive backs. I know that sounds crazy. I totally get it. But if we're talking about sheer talent, I do think that South Carolina stacks up. And some of you may think this conversation's crazy because they're like, Chris, they're literally a Conference USA team. How do the Gamecocks not have the advantage at every single position unit? Well, that's just kind of where we are right now. That's where we are. So I go with a push here. I like South Carolina's, I think guys like Nick Emanwari, DQ Smith, I think you're going to see them play much better. Jelon Kilgore is one of the best players on this football team. And I do think JSU has a bit of a weak secondary. That's one that South Carolina should be able to expose in this football game. So I'm going with the push in the secondary. Now, we move to special teams, punter and kicker specifically. This one's interesting because many look at Kai Kroger and ask the question, what is wrong with Kai Kroger? What is going on with Kai? What happened? Did NIL get to his head? I heard something. Did he spend too much time working on his golf swing? Like all these things, these outrageous claims. If you look at the numbers, guys, Kai Kroger, he's not as good as he was last year. But the drop-off is not nearly as severe as some would make it sound. It's not nearly as severe, right? You then look at what Jacksonville State presents. They got a really good punter themselves, guys, averaging just a little bit less than Kai, around 42 yards per punt. He's down 15 punts inside the 20. They've had some inconsistencies at the kicker spot. Their kicker, I believe, is 9 of 14 on the season. Mitch Jeter, 10 of 12. He's been really, really good for the Gamecocks all throughout this season. I'm giving South Carolina the nod when it comes to punter and kicker because I'm just not buying into the complete and total demise of Kai Kroger. Has he had the here's the thing. Kai Kroger hasn't been bad. He just hasn't been special. That's it. Kai Kroger, it's not that he's been bad. He just has not been special for South Carolina. And so many people can't understand why Kai Kroger hasn't been special. That being said, I do think the combination of Kai Kroger, Mitch Jeter is better than what Jacksonville State has. And for that reason, I give the Gamecocks, South Carolina Gamecocks, the nod at punter and kicker. And finally, guys, to the coaching side of things, who has the advantage on the sidelines? Guys, I'm giving the nod to Jacksonville State, and I'm here to tell you why. It's not so much like a knock on Shane Beamer. It's really not. But it's a nod to a guy in Rich Rodriguez that has been doing this thing a long time. And he's won a lot of football games at a lot of different schools. This guy knows ball, coaches it well, wins where he goes. He's got Jacksonville State rolling, leading them into FBS, this being their first year at FBS. You look at his staff, his offensive coordinator's been with him for years. His defensive coordinator, by the way, here's a funny side note, is also a Clemson alum, a Clemson grad assistant, if you will. So he's assembled a good staff. And I look purely at Rich Rodriguez. I respect the tenure and the coaching prowess of a Rich Rodriguez. I'm not saying Shane Beamer's a bad coach by any means. I'm not trying to pile on because Carolina's 2-6. None of that. But you look at experience, and I think that means so much in the head coach's chair. I feel like that means so much, that experience, right? So on the coaching side of things, I do give Jacksonville State the nod ever so slightly. And as you can tell from these position unit comparisons, when it comes to Gamecocks and Gamecocks Saturday in Willie B, it should be a wildly entertaining contest this weekend.